So I want to take a moment and introduce some special guests that we actually have with us this morning. I'm going to invite them up. The youth group from High Point, North Carolina. I want you guys to stand up real quick for me. Yeah, we're giving them some love. You don't know why you're giving them love. I'm saying why we're giving them some love. So real quick, the couple up here front, this is Michael and Heather Harris. We went to college together. So Danielle and me, we were all part of the same group of friends throughout college. And over a year ago, Michael came to me with this idea. It's like, hey, once you guys kind of get started as a church, we'd love to bring our youth group up for a week and serve with you in the community. And I'm like, that sounds like an awesome idea. And so this past week, they got in Tuesday night. And so Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, this amazing group of 17 people, they served our city with the love of Jesus. It was amazing. They served in nursing homes. They pulled weeds for the Conservancy all throughout downtown at the Point by the zoo, all these crazy, difficult labor jobs, and they did it with mostly a smile on their face and some scratches and bruises afterwards. But they served the city a lot this past week, which we're so thankful for. We loved hanging out with them. We did what any typical Yinzer would do, and we taught them to play hockey this week, which was awesome. We got sticks, and we took them to an outdoor deck hockey rink, and they loved it. So the Southern folk love hockey too, because that's what Pittsburgh people do. We teach them to love hockey. They had a good time. They had their first Permane Brothers sandwich last night, and so they got the full experience. And they've been an amazing group to have this week, and so we're thankful for them. They actually leave to go back to North Carolina right after this service, and so after service, feel free to introduce yourselves to them and say thanks, because they've been a big part of who we are. And what's been really cool is they actually made some new connections in our community for us and just made some new relationships. So hopefully that'll be something we can continue to cultivate. But it was so cool to have them. It's really cool to see this dream that Michael had over a year ago come to fruition, man. So it's good seeing you guys. Let's give them one more round of applause. They're awesome. So they're here and you're here, and we are wrapping up our series called Dear Church. And for the past 3 weeks, we've been looking at a small book in the Bible that Paul wrote. And Paul was this guy who hated Jesus for a long time and was against him, and then came to know Jesus and then dedicated his life to following Jesus and help other people follow Jesus. And he wrote this letter to a group of Christians, this church in Philippi. They were called the Philippians. And so we have this book in the Bible called Philippians. And in this letter that he wrote them, the whole purpose of it is to give them encouragement and to give them practical steps of what a church should look like and how a church should live out their lives and their faith and their relationships with each other, no matter what the circumstances are, no matter what happens in life. This is who we're supposed to be as a church. And this series is really important for us to do. I think it's a brand new church. It's only 4 months old, because in this room, we have people who are following Jesus and been doing that for a long time. There's people in this room that are exploring and trying to figure out, okay, who's this Jesus guy? What's this faith thing all about? And there's some people here just like, you know what, I don't even know if I believe that, but I'm here for whatever reason that may be. And they're exploring and figuring out. And it's important for us to go throughout this series, because no matter where we are on our spiritual journey, we need to know and understand what a church should look like, how we should live, how we should love, what it's supposed to be. Because so often our experience with church, our understanding of church has been tainted by maybe false information or a bad experience or whatever that may be. And so that's why this series is so important for us to do as a church, because we're trying to kind of calibrate ourselves and say, this is what a church should look like. This is what we're supposed to do. In week 1, Tony, he was here, and he spoke about this idea about how we're supposed to love each other and be dedicated together on mission. And the church is supposed to stay focused on what we're all about. In week 2, we talked about how we're supposed to be humble and live out the same humility that Jesus lived out, not thinking that we're better than anybody else, but putting other people ahead of us, putting their needs and their desires before us so we can love them and serve them with the same attitude that Jesus had. And then last week, we talked about how we as a church, as Christians, we are never meant to stay the same. That Jesus is meant to change us, to make us more like him. The things that we used to think is gain, they're now garbage compared to knowing and pursuing our relationship with Jesus. And all those things make up what a church is supposed to be. And now we're going to wrap up this series talking about what it really looks like to move forward no matter what happens, no matter what the circumstances are. Because we have a problem as humans. We have this tension that we deal with, all of us, no matter who we are, no matter what our background is here. All of us have this tension that that we never feel content sometimes. We never feel satisfied. We're always looking for something more. We experience moments of satisfaction or contentment, but then it just seems like it's fleeting, and we're looking for something else. And something's good for a moment, and then, you know, what's the next thing? Or what's the next thing after that? And then that causes worry in our lives. That causes stress in our lives. We want this desire to want more, and we start chasing after something else. Noah, my son, just turned 6 a few weeks ago, and we celebrated his birthday. There he is. That's the most innocent he will ever look in any situation, just so we're clear. If you guys know him, you know that's exactly right. But we're celebrating his 6th birthday. I can't believe I have a 6-year-old, but Noah is just this energetic kid. If you guys seen him, you guys know that. But Noah also, he's like all of us. He was all about his presents on his birthday, which is fair because it's his birthday. He wants some presents. And the kicker is every time someone came to the house, a family member, a friend, or whatever it may be, he ran over to greet them and he immediately looked, did they have a present in his hand? Okay? And so he's looking for that. My favorite was Scott, the guy who runs our tech booth. It's actually his birthday today. And so Scott gets over to the house and he's there and he doesn't have a present for Noah. And Noah goes, where's my present? And Scott just kind of looks at him like, I'm your present. And Noah's like, nope, not good enough for Noah. He wants something more. He wants something better. He's just discontent in that moment. And then he got all these presents. Now granted, there were grandparents there at the party. And if you're a grandparent or you know grandparents or you have kids, you know grandparents spoil your children like crazy. So, Noah has this pile of presents, mainly from grandparents. And he's going through them all, opening them up. And I'm looking like, gosh, that thing makes noise. Where are we going to store that? Like all these, that's what I'm thinking as a parent. Noah's having a good old time. He gets done with the presents and goes, are there any more? And he just kind of has this mentality of discontent. He loved the moment of opening the presents, but he wanted something more. Now, he's innocent in that. Like, I'm not like faulting him for that mentality because I'm 32 and I still think that way. Is there any more presents, Danielle? Like, did you give me anything else? But we kind of have that mentality as people. Something maybe good happens in life or maybe something bad happens in life, but regardless of whatever that moment is, we kind of get discontent in that. We get anxious about the moment. We get anxious about what's to come. We want something more. We want something different. And it causes worry and stress and fear and anxiety. And it causes this tension in our lives. And that tension, that anxiousness can really impact the way we live out our lives. Good things will happen, but because we get discontent, we simply miss the good and we keep searching. We want more things. We want more money. We want better relationships. We want a better job. We want better luxuries. And we want different solutions to the problems that lay before us. We never can move forward enough because we're always looking for something different. And it's something all of us struggle with, whether it's money or relationship or family problems or work problems or car problems or house problems or political problems. Unfortunately, though, these problems that we all experience, they're not going to go away. Sorry to disappoint you, but the things we deal with, the problems, the tensions that we have, those things will not go away. And so the tension we have to wrestle with today as a church and as a group of people working as one together this morning, we have to wrestle with how do we become content? How do we move forward? How do we have joy in the midst of any circumstance we deal with? And that's what Paul addresses as he's wrapping up his letter to the Philippians. He addresses this tension. He's closing out his letter, writing to this church that's still very relevant to us today. And Paul is in the midst of crazy chaos. He is sitting in prison right now as he's writing this letter. His death is coming. He knows his time on this earth is coming close to an end. And the problem was, it wasn't just him in prison knowing death was coming. He was writing to the Philippians because there was also grumbling and discontent and division happening within that church. And this is just something I think it's really important for us to see. If you guys have ever been a part of a church and you feel like, I don't want to be part of that church because there's division, there's problems, people gossip, it's just broken. I just want us just to see that sometimes that's just what happens when we put a bunch of humans together. Because here we are in the Bible reading scripture and we're seeing Paul write this stuff out, and bigger reason he's writing them is because that church he's writing to, they were having problems. They had difficulty agreeing on things. They had some discontent with each other. They were arguing and bickering and causing division amongst themselves. And Paul's writing them like, guys, no, this isn't how it's supposed to work. Let's figure this out. In the same sense, as he's in prison in Rome, the church in Rome is also dealing with division too and problems. So Paul is like this parent with his children just causing all these problems, these churches he loves dearly, and he's in prison waiting on his death, dealing with these churches having problems, and he's in the midst of a chaotic situation. It's crazy, and it's easy to look at Paul and go, dude, how do you put up with this? But from our earthly standards, Paul's in a bad situation, but he writes something completely different. He says throughout this letter, like, listen, it's not about me. It's about Jesus. It's all about advancing the gospel and telling people about who Jesus is and what he's done out of love. This is why we exist as a church. It's about humility. It's about how we are changing because of who Jesus is. This is what's important. And he says, now go live it out And this is what he says. This is how we live it out in Philippians 4:4-5. Paul writes this to that church. Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. So Paul, as he's sitting in prison, as he's dealing with churches around him, the one in Rome, the one he's writing to in Philippi, as they're dealing with their own division and discontent and their disagreements with each other, he says to rejoice. He says to have joy. And rejoice means to feel or show great delight in something. And Paul's saying you show at all times great joy, great delight, great excitement in Jesus because of who he is. Because of everything that Jesus is, everything that he has done, everything he is continuing to do, in that we have joy. Paul says. This is what the church is supposed to live out no matter what the circumstance. We rejoice because Jesus has changed everything. He reminds them that no matter what happens, no matter what difficulties that we're in, no matter what we're dealing with in life, no matter what we're facing in the future, no matter what we're facing right now, he calls us to have great joy in our expression and the way we live our lives because of Jesus. Because before Jesus, they didn't have hope. Before Jesus, they spent all their lives trying to follow the rules perfectly and try to live up to God's standards. And it was in Jesus they realized they didn't have to live up to his standards because they had grace through Christ. And Jesus gave them this new life, this new identity, this new purpose. And in that, no matter what was happening, they could have great joy. No matter what was taking place. Our faith as a church would be centered around who Jesus is and what he's done. And Paul reminds the church in Philippi, he tells the Philippians, hey, rejoice in the Lord always. I'll say it again, rejoice. Because of who he is, what he's done, and the way we live should reflect that. And he's reminding this church that, and here we are reading it a couple thousand years later, and it's still true for the church today. That no matter what we go through, our faith, our lives, this church is centered on Jesus and who he is and what he's done. And it's in that we should rejoice. And the reason we do that is, now Paul doesn't just say, no matter what happens, just have joy. He addresses that things aren't easy because he continues on by saying in Philippians 4:6-7, he says, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Paul says not to be anxious about anything. And the word in the original language in this moment where he says don't be anxious, it literally means to be pulled in different directions. Like you're trying to go one way, but something's happening in life and it's pulling you somewhere different. And there's that tension that causes this anxiousness, this fear, this worry. And Paul's saying don't be anxious about anything, but in everything, go to God in prayer. But this idea of anxiousness, this is something we still deal with in our culture today. In fact, I would argue we deal with it more than ever before. Anxiousness, worry, and fear, it's become an epidemic in our society. Things like worry and fear, they pull us apart. People struggle to function. People can't move forward with life because we're struggling with things that are pulling us in all these different directions, whatever that may be. It impacts us emotionally, physically, spiritually, and we have scientific evidence now that we've been able to measure this and to see the impact that these things cause on our lives. It impacts our marriages, it impacts our jobs, it impacts our relationship with our kids and our neighbors and our family and friends. It impacts every area of life when we feel like we're being pulled in all these different directions. We're more anxious than ever. And I think the reason is, and what research is showing, is because we're searching and we're unsatisfied with things. We're fear-driven and we're discontent. We keep looking, we keep searching, we keep wanting more and looking for something different and not finding satisfaction in those things, whether it be job, whether it be relationships, whether it be things like sex or alcohol, whatever that may be. We're looking for this contentness and we're not finding it. And so we keep looking and searching and we keep getting discontent. And the Philippians, and they were dealing with that as a society, and so are we. And Paul gives them this advice by saying, don't be anxious about anything, but in everything, go to God in prayer. He starts off with prayer. He says, when things pull us away from God in the direction he wants us to go in life, our first reaction should be prayer, not our last. Now, I don't know about you, the way I operate with prayer a lot of my time is prayer is usually my last, second, Hail Mary to God. I try to control everything I can do in my life. If something's bad is happening, if I have a situation with my family or work with the church or relationships, whatever that may be, I do whatever I can to control those situations. I put all my effort into it, try to fix it, try to solve the problem, whatever. And then when those things don't work, then I'm like, oh yeah, God, can you help me with this situation right now? I think that's a lot of us in how we operate with faith sometimes. That God becomes kind of this last second option when it comes to prayer. It's like, oh, we need help now. Maybe now we should pray about it. Well, Paul's saying in every situation, not in just the bad situations, not just the good situations, in every situation, we should go to God in prayer first and foremost. And Paul didn't just say, pray about it. Because that's something we also struggle with, especially as a pastor. Like someone says, what should I do about this situation? I'll just pray about it. What does that mean? Especially if we're not comfortable praying, especially if maybe we don't pray to God very much at all. Like, what do we say to him? What's the whole purpose of prayer? And I think this is what's important, because what Paul says in every situation, when he's saying prayer, there's a couple of things we should do based off what he wrote here. We should be praying with petition and thanksgiving. First of all, what is prayer? Prayer is our avenue to God. You see, before Jesus, the way the Jewish people thought of God as God was this big kind of distant thing. God was present, but there was still all these barriers in the way. And so what they would do, the way they would go to God, and they go through this system of sacrificing animals or bringing sacrifices to the temple, and they couldn't even get one-on-one with God. Only the high priest could ever go one-on-one with God. In the temple, there was this room called the Holy of Holies that was divided with this extremely big and thick curtain, and the only person who could go into that, because that was where they believed, they felt like the presence of God dwelt, that's where only the high priest could go. And it was such a big deal that they would wrap a rope around the high priest just in case he would die when he was in the Holy of Holies. Maybe it was his time to go. Maybe just, the shock and awe of having God in his presence was there. And so if he died, no one else could go in there, so they have to pull his dead body out. Imagine that situation. Like, oh, the high priest died. Let's pull him out like a big fish type thing. But they felt like God wasn't this thing they had access to. But Jesus changed all that. Jesus bridged the gap between us and God and gave us, through faith in Jesus, a relationship back with God where we can have eternity with God, but we also have life with God now. And we have this avenue to pray with God. We have this opportunity to communicate to the guy who created all of the things we see in this universe. That's what prayer is. Prayer is our avenue to talk with God. And it's not a list of things to do. It's not this thing that just says, God, help me. Here's my things I need you to do for me over the next week. Because sometimes that's how we react with prayer. But actually, prayer starts first and foremost with worship and adoration. It starts by going with God and saying, God, this is who you are. You're amazing. You're loving. You're forgiving. You are God and I am not. It starts with this humble mentality to say, you know what? God, I'm not you. I spend most of my life trying to be you and controlling everything, but you're the one who's God. And we bring worship and adoration to him, and it starts with who he is. It starts with this idea of rejoicing in the fact that God is God and we are not. And if we can start there every day of our lives, that's a good place to start, by reminding ourselves that we are not God, even though we try to live it out that way. So we start with this idea of worship and adoration. Then we move this idea of petition. Paul says in everything by prayer and petition. And petition is earnestly sharing our needs with God. Now, I have 3 little boys, and sometimes they drive me nuts. But you know what? If they need something, it's important for them to come and ask me or Danielle that they need something. It's important for them to come to me and say, Daddy, I need this. I want this. And sometimes we get to decide, is it a want or is it a need? But they come to me with their earnest desires, and then we start working through them. That's the way we are trying to build that relationship, and that's how God wants it with us. He wants us to come to him with our needs and our desires. By coming with our petition, the stuff that bothers us, the stuff that weighs heavy on our lives, the jobs, the relationships, the tensions at work, whatever that may be, God wants us to come to him with those tensions, those needs, those desires. We're not going to burden him with them. We're not going to bother him by bringing those up to him. He wants to hear it. And so we have this amazing opportunity to talk to God with prayer, and we should be bringing those things that weigh heavy on our lives to him. That's an amazing opportunity that we have with that. And Paul says in every situation to go to God with prayer. So we do it with petition. We ask we share our needs, but we also bring thanksgiving to him as well. Because no matter what's taking place in our lives, the hope that we find in our faith as Christians is that everything is taken care of through Jesus Christ. Our eternity is secure because of the death and resurrection of Jesus. And so when we come to God in prayer and we say, God, you're God, I'm not, but here's my things, here's the desires of my heart, here's the problems I'm dealing with in life, he wants us to bring those to him. But man, it is so important for us to remember that no matter what happens, Paul says, that we go to God with thanksgiving and say, God, you've taken care of it all. No matter what happens, I've got you, I've got Jesus. And that gives me the faith, hope, and love to get me through these difficult situations. Just like I love when my kids say to me, Daddy, thank you. God loves it when we say to God, Father, thank you for everything you are and everything that you've done. And so we have this amazing opportunity to go to God with prayer. And no matter what happens in life, no matter how we're being pulled in different directions, Paul says in every situation, we start with prayer. It starts with right prayer, this idea of worship, this idea of bringing our needs and desires to God, and this concept of giving thanks as well. So it starts with right prayer. Then Paul continues, because it's not just prayer, it's also the way we think too. He says in Philippians 4:8, he says, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. You see, often our mind is overlooked when it comes to this idea of discontent, anxiety, fear, being pulled in different directions. The situations of our lives, we look at the current situation, we look at the thing that happened, but we kind of ignore the fact that a lot of times the problems that we continue to deal with, a lot of times are things that we continue to hold on to in our minds. I mean, think about this. How many of you guys have had a bad day at work? Some bad situation with a coworker, and guess what? You're bringing that tension home, and you sit down, and your spouse or whoever is like, how was your day? And you're like, boom, it was awful, and you just blow up on them. Because we just bring that tension with us. It's something we're thinking about. It's something we're dwelling about. It's something we hold on to. Or maybe it's a difficult argument or disagreement with your spouse. It never just stays with you and your spouse, does it? It usually overflows into maybe your work, or maybe it overflows into your relationship with your kids, or whatever that may be. Because there are things we hold on to, things we think about. And often we overlook how big of a deal our mind is and the way we think about things, the way we hold on to things there. This was true for the Philippians, and it's true for us. The Philippians saw the tension around them in their church, and their thoughts kept focusing on that. They kept thinking about the division and the disagreements and the brokenness in that, and that caused them to not be able to move forward, but to be pulled apart in different directions and not stay focused on who Jesus was and remember to move forward in that mission. It kept them in that tension, it kept them in that difficulty, and we do the same thing. So often something happens that is difficult. I'm not disregarding that. Things that happen in our life are heavy, they're troubling, they're difficult to move forward with. But so often what we do more often than not is we hold on to them with our thoughts. We think about the things that pull us away from God. That's not the thing that we want to keep happening to us, but that's what we do. We hang on to it all the time. We dwell on it. We reflect on it. And it's where maybe it's a struggle that we have, some sort of sin or addiction or whatever it may be, and we keep thinking and dwelling on those things. And it brings shame, it brings guilt, it reminds us of our brokenness, and we just let that overflow into all areas of our lives. And Paul says something different, though. He reminds us of how powerful the mind is by saying, think about the good. Whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. He's reminding us that our thoughts have so much power in the way we live our lives. And are we focusing on the difficulties? Are we holding on to the shame, the guilt, the regret, the baggage? Or are we thinking about the good that Jesus brings? The hope, the forgiveness, the eternal life. You see, when difficulties hit, Paul says our mind has a lot to do with how we get through it. To rejoice, it means we have to have right thinking as well. It's prayer, it's the way we think, but then it continues, he wraps up, it says Philippians 9, and how we live as well. He says, whatever you have learned or received or heard from me, put into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. Now listen, I'm going to just be honest. This sounds really arrogant from Paul right here. He's like, listen, anything you've seen from me, everything I've done, do everything I've done. Okay, just follow me in that. What I've done, just copy me. It sounds like Paul's kind of cocky here by saying, I've got it all put together, man. Just follow me. Now Paul didn't. Paul wrote in different letters that he was still just as broken as we are. But he was saying it is so important that when you have people in your lives that show the fruit of who God is, the peace, the patience, the love, the kindness, the gentleness, when you see that, we should follow them in that living. And the way they're living, we should follow them into, ask them questions, get closer with them to learn, to kind of have that same thing rub off on us so we can continue to live the way Jesus wants us to live as well. And Paul's saying that, listen, the life, the fruit that he shows, this is from God. It's from the Spirit. It's from who God is making him to be. So he's encouraging them, hey, follow me into that as we follow Jesus together. The Philippians should have followed into that, and we need to do that too. We need people to follow in our faith. We can't do this thing alone. The beauty of One Church, one of the biggest reasons we named it is because we can't do faith alone. We have to do it together, and we need other people to show us and lead us in that journey of following Jesus and what he's calling us to do. We need it to be reminded if we're Christians and people who are far from God, who don't identify as Christians, you guys need to hear it too. Because we need to see what it looks like to follow Jesus. I've got the amazing privilege and I got this great blessing with marrying into a really cool family. A lot of the time there's jokes like, you get the in-laws, you have to deal with the in-laws and things like that. I never really feel like I'm dealing with my in-laws because my in-laws are awesome. First of all, Danielle's brothers are amazing. They're so much fun. I'm so thankful for their friendship. Danielle's mom is awesome and she's an amazing cook, so that's just a blessing for me and unhealthy for me. But seriously, I hit the jackpot when Brian Fisher became my father-in-law. See, Brian is this guy where at first I was terrified of him because he's just this personality where, like, if he's happy, he looks like this. If he's mad, he looks like this. If he's sad, looks like this. You don't know what he's thinking most of the time. And so for the first year of me dating Danielle, I'm like, does this dude like me or not? You just couldn't tell. But as you get to know him, you get to learn from him, you realize this guy is one of the most peaceful, patient, kind, most generous people that's ever walked this planet. I see him interact with my kids, and my kids are not easy to deal with. I'll never say they are. And I lose my patience with them. I lose my temper with them. And they'll do something that makes me want to snap, and I'll see Brian go, hey, man, what'd you do that for? And he has this like peaceful conversation with my kids, and all of a sudden, like Noah, Drew, and they'll explain to him what's going on. All of a sudden, he kind of redirects them, and we'll go, oh, that's how you raise 4 crazy kids to be good adults today. I see the way he treats his wife with kindness and love. He has to travel a lot, so he's not home a lot of times. But man, when he's home, he treats her like she's the most important thing on this planet. It's amazing to see. All because he loves Jesus. And it overflows into every aspect of his life. I'm a better follower of Jesus because of who Brian is. I'm trying to follow Jesus because of the way Brian follows Jesus. And we all need that. We all need people in our lives that show us what it looks like to follow Jesus and shows us what it means to be a follower of Jesus. So we keep going after that. We can't do it alone. When we follow others who are following Jesus, we won't be so easily pulled the other way. This keeps us rejoicing. So Paul says we need to rejoice no matter what the circumstance. And we do that with right prayer, right thinking, and right living because it keeps us focused on Jesus. It's our prayer, it's our thoughts, and the way we live out our actions. And here's why this is important. Because a life following Jesus, we're not protected from difficulties. Sometimes that's a misconception. We think of Jesus, we think of faith, we think of Christianity, we think, this is the way I get out of all the problems in life. If I put my trust in Jesus, all the problems are gone. But that's not true because storms and difficulties still hit. Marriages are still difficult. Jobs are still difficult. There's still brokenness and war and racism and brokenness all throughout our world today. We're still living with it, and sometimes we contribute to it. And too often we look at faith as a way to make life perfect, but it's actually the way we get through an imperfect life. And if you missed what I said, please don't miss that again. Too often we look at faith as a way to make life perfect, but it's actually the way to get through an imperfect life. Christians need to be reminded of this. People exploring Jesus need to be reminded from this. People far from God, you need to be reminded of this as well. That faith in Jesus doesn't protect us from difficulties. They're still going to come. But it's faith in Jesus that helps us know how to get through those difficulties even better. Too often we get pulled away from God because we paint the wrong picture of who God is and how life functions. So the question for you today is what's pulling you? What is pulling your attention away from God? What is causing stress? What's causing fear? What's causing anxiety? What relationships in your life are you dreading to deal with as you leave here today? What tensions are overflowing into all aspects of your life? Is it relationships? With your spouse, with your kids, with your family, with your neighbors? Is it finances? Are you going to have enough to make it work this month? Or, hey, we have an abundance. How should we spend this appropriately? Is it work? Is it looking for work, dealing with your work, dealing with your boss or coworkers? Is it life decisions? Choosing college or whatever that may be coming up, choosing family decisions? Is it sin? Is it baggage that you carry because of some sort of struggle that's in your life? Whatever it is, here's the truth. I know it's difficult. I'm never going to deny that. The Bible doesn't deny that. Paul doesn't deny that. There are things that are super difficult in life. But Paul says in all those situations, we're called to rejoice with prayer and everything. We don't pick and choose. Paul says the first thing, go to prayer with worship, adoration, presenting our needs with thanksgiving. It's something we have to do for that. If we're going to go to God with everything in prayer, maybe we should make time for it. We make time to eat every day. We make time to work every day. We make time to make sure we spend time with our family and our spouse and our kids. If prayer is our direct connection to God, we should probably make time to spend time with God in that. So I'm going to challenge you guys. Maybe you're not used to praying. That's okay. My encouragement for you is maybe make a 5-minute window every day this week. Doesn't have to be long, doesn't have to be extravagant, doesn't have to be anything amazing. It just needs to be, hey, I'm going to spend time with God this week, even just for 5 minutes. And you go to him, just talk to him. Pray. Remember, he's God, you're not. Present your needs, give thanksgiving, and see how that starts changing things. It starts with right prayer. It also goes to right thinking. We need to be focused on the right things and not letting the bad things keep hold of us and keep pulling us in different directions like we always let it happen. And we need right living. We need to be one in this. The reason the church exists, both here in Chartiers Valley, at this school, and all throughout this world, is because we need to be following each other, encouraging each other to follow Jesus. That's what being one is all about. We have to help each other in this. That's why it's so important for us to stay connected with a church community. So as the youth group from North Carolina, as they head back, they're going back to their church community there. And as we stay here, we have this church community here where we can invite people into it and say, hey, together, we don't have anything figured out, but together we'll start figuring things out together. Working as one to help people follow Jesus. That's why I invite you to stay connected with us as a church. I'm excited for this next series that we're kicking off next week. We're calling it Role Players. And we're looking at different people throughout the Bible that play different roles, small roles. They seem almost insignificant. Man, God did amazing things through that. And we're kicking that off next week, and I would love for you guys to join us. I'd love for you to bring some people with you because I think this series is going to be really powerful for us as a church. And I'm excited. In 2 weeks, we have a special guest speaker coming. I don't like to brag, but I have a famous friend. Okay, I'm serious. I have a friend named Cody Sable. This is him right here. Cody Sable he's a kid, man. He's like 22 years old, 23. He's a baby to me. But this dude is an amazing painter. He did all that painting right there with his fingers. He's a finger painter. Like I remember finger painting as a kid. Nothing looked like that when I painted with the fingers. But Cody's going to be here in 2 weeks, and he's going to be speaking, he's going to be painting, he's going to be sharing the message of who Jesus is to us. And I'm so thankful that he can be a part of it with us. He's a good friend of mine. He said he couldn't wait to come and speak. So he's coming. He's a Pittsburgh kid. He will be coming in 2 weeks, and I'd love for you guys to be here and invite some people with you because it's going to be a great Sunday for us to gather. But we kick off that series next week. Cody will be here in 2 weeks. Let's stick together in this, in the craziness of summer. Let's make this thing a priority to be one together as we live out our faith together to encourage each other. Because here's the truth. This is not going to fix all the difficulties that we have. We're still going to deal with them. There's still going to be problems. Everything that you and I are dealing with right now, as we leave here today, they're still waiting for us outside these doors. But the whole purpose of this series, the whole purpose of what Paul's writing about, he wasn't trying to eliminate difficulties. What he was saying is this is how we get through it, and this is the one thing that I want us to be reminded of today. And the North Point, the High Point kids, this is what we do every week. Every week when we're teaching, we have a one thing. That if you remember nothing else that I've said, which is probably true, remember this. And this is the one thing. Joy doesn't eliminate difficulties, but it gives us the direction to get through them. And this is what Paul is reminding us. Is that we choose joy, we choose to rejoice no matter what's taking place. It's not going to get rid of our problems, but it's going to help us get through them. Because that's what we're being called to do. And this is going to lead us to stronger lives, stronger families, stronger churches, stronger community. The world doesn't need to eliminate problems. We just need the right way to get through them and help people and love people through them. Because we're not going to be able to get through because the world is always going to be broken. And so God says, you know what, enough's enough. Let's make it right. Jesus is that way. Jesus is that person that we put our trust in. And so, dear church, Paul writes, rejoice. And that's what we're supposed to do as one church. In a moment, Ben and Jess are going to come up and lead us into some music. And what we're going to do in this is over the next 2 songs, I'm going to challenge you guys to rejoice. Now, maybe you're uncomfortable with this. I am. I'm not a big fan of like getting up, like standing up and singing because like what if the neighbor hears me and like I'm not good at it? But Paul's saying in every situation, rejoice. So Ben and Jess are going to lead us in a couple songs in a moment. I'm going to encourage you guys to rejoice in that. Reflect on who God is. Sing out the praises of how amazing He is, how crazy His love for us, and how much we need Him. And after these next 2 songs, we're going to take communion together. So we'll pass out communion. And if you're new together, hang on to that communion because we take it together as one church. So as it's passed out, hold on to that, and I'll come up after these next 2 songs to lead us in that communion together. Let's pray. God, thank you so much for today. And God, thank you for Jesus, who changed everything. God, through His death and resurrection, we're reminded of how much you love us, how much you came to save us and rescue us and restore us to the life that you want us to have. And God, that doesn't protect us from brokenness. It doesn't protect us from difficulties, but man, it's in that we can be reminded of how amazing you are, that we can rejoice in who you are and show that joy in the way we live, the way we sing, the way we talk, the way we interact with other people. Because it's through that we can be reminded that, yeah, we don't get free from difficulties, but we know how to get through them with you. So God, help us to live that out. God, help us to leave here with joy. Help us to stay focused on you and not get pulled apart by everything that's waiting to destroy us and bring anxiousness and fear. Because God, you are better than all that. We love you, and we pray.